We'll try again after service, Rhett. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. In these simple words, John sets forth the profound mystery of the Incarnation, how Jesus, God the Son, became fully human. In this mystery, writes our Lutheran Confessions, lie our only comfort, life, and salvation. This morning, I simply want to revel in and celebrate this mystery by taking a closer look at these 8 words. To start, we must first look at their context. Way back in the beginning, well, actually not way back, because we're in the first chapter of the Gospel, but at the first verse of John's Gospel, the Apostle John peers back to the mystery of eternity to reveal Jesus' full identity to us. Using the phrase, the Word, as a title for Jesus to convey that he is the absolute and final revelation of God, John begins, "In the beginning was the Word." In the Greek, the term translated as was reaches back indefinitely into the mystery of eternity. You could almost translate it as, in the beginning, the Word continually was. He always existed. In short, Jesus is timeless, eternal, and uncreated. Next, John says that throughout this timeless eternity, quote, the Word was with God. Once again, our English can't quite carry what the Greek is getting at here. The word translated as with is more than a proximity, but rather it's a living, personal relationship. Thus, throughout all eternity, Jesus lived in close communion with God. Following this then, using the simplest of words, John matter-of-factly lays out the mystery that Christians later would call the Trinity. The Word, who existed throughout all eternity in close proximity and communion with God, is in fact God himself. The Word was God, John writes. From all eternity, Jesus has existed with God, as God. 2 truths that seem impossible to reconcile, and yet John writes them in the plainest of ways. Truly, this is a God-breathed revelation. Now, before we move on to the mystery of the Incarnation, John still has one final piece to give us. He says, all things were made through him, and without him not anything made that was made. In other words, Jesus, who existed in all eternity with God as God, is the one through whom all things exist. There is nothing, not one atom, proton, electron, lepton, you name it, that doesn't owe its existence to Jesus. So with these truths of the first 3 verses in the back of our minds then, let's look again at our passage today in verse 14. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. First, the term became in the Greek, ginomai, means to experience a state or a mode of existence, to acquire or to become something. Second, the mode of existence that the eternal Word took up then is the incarnation, is the flesh. Sarx in the Greek, this term denotes our creaturely existence to the fullest degree. So with verses 1 through 3 in the back of our heads then, really just think about how profound this is. Jesus, who existed throughout all eternity with God as God, became human to the fullest degree. The one who brought the entire universe into being is born within the universe as a creature. The Creator became a creature. And he wasn't playing games. Being human to the fullest degree, as the term flesh implies, Jesus got the flu. He struggled with temptation, was sorrowful, suffered hunger pangs, and the like. Thus, as our Athanasius Creed declares, Jesus is God of the substance of the Father, begotten before the worlds, and man of the substance of his mother, born in the world, perfect man, perfect God. Third, John says that in the flesh, the word, quote, dwelt among us. The term dwelt is a loaded one in the biblical drama, meaning to pitch one's tent. It was associated with God gloriously dwelling with the Old Testament people in the tabernacles and the temple. Thus, in saying the word dwelt among us, John is declaring that in Jesus, God's glorious presence is dwelling once again with his people in a way that is similar to the tabernacle and the temple. However, the word dwelling outshines these former dwellings like the sun to shadows. In encountering Jesus, the Word made flesh, you are encountering God in all of his fullness. No wonder John says in the words that follow, we have seen his glory, glory of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. So let's simply revel in these truths that we laid out today. Jesus, who existed throughout all eternity with God as God, became human to the fullest degree. In him, God dwelt amongst his people in a way that was more intimate than ever before. I mean, think about that. What are some implications this could have for your faith? Recently, as I was pondering over truths like this for our coffee talk a couple weeks ago, it hit me. To proclaim that Jesus is God made human to the fullest degree is also to proclaim that God loves you more than you could ever fathom. You see, in a mystery that can only be confessed, in sending Jesus' Son to save us, God himself, in the second person of the Trinity, of course, came to save us. Therefore, when we say Jesus suffered, died, and was buried in our creeds, we are also saying that God endured the same. No one gets at this better than Luther, who writes that he, Jesus, became human and being just like us. Therefore, we could say it's called God's dying, God's martyrdom, God's blood, and God's death. For God in his own nature cannot die. But now that God and man are united in one person, it is called God's death, when the man dies who is of one substance or one person with God. Heady, I know, but bear with me for one moment. In his letter to the Romans, Paul writes, God shows his love for us in that while we were sinners, Christ died for us. Now, this is a truth we've heard many times. Now, combine it with what we heard today. The Christ who died for sinners like us is the one who existed throughout all eternity with God as God and became human to the fullest degree. Truly, in the Incarnation, we are treated to the love of God that is beyond and that staggers our imagination. And we're just scratching the surface when it comes to this mystery. So my encouragement to you in what remains of this Christmas season is to simply revel in the mystery of the Incarnation. Jesus, who existed throughout all eternity as God, became human to the fullest degree. In him, God dwelt with humanity in a way that was more intimate than ever before. Once more, he did it, as we'll soon declare in our Nicene Creed, for us and for our salvation. I mean, there is no better news that exists in all the world. So let's celebrate it. And in fact, let's celebrate it, Doris, as we sing our next hymn. You may stand.